We're live.
Alrighty. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Inside Movies Galore. We are continuing the holiday cheer as um, we are continuing our films that we have submitted and voted upon to share with you and discuss together. So, Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about the film that we are going to be discussing tonight?
Well, it is the 1946 masterpiece, directed by Frank Capra, known as It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed. And it is widely regarded as not just probably the best Christmas film ever made, but one of the best movies ever made. And I would certainly agree with that. It's been very heavily acclaimed and it's beloved all these many years later. Um, and But it was not at all a major success when it came out. It was actually pretty divisive when it came out and not particularly well regarded. But nowadays, it's something of a classic. So we have a lot of movie to talk about and a little time to do it. So let's just jump right in. So, Dave, why don't you tell us what your first impressions of this film were?
Oh, God. I'm not even sure when I first saw this, but I know that my family grew up with this film on their roster. And I would have to say, out of all the Christmas films that I have ever seen, this is like second to like my favorites of the classics, if I had to say so, because you know this it's kind of an interesting animal of a film because it has a lot of reality involved in it. It spans the lifetime of a man who, you know, just had to keep holding the fort, for his own, keeping his happiness aside and having to deal with the social classes of poverty and rich, the political aspect of a small town. And I will have to say that I have seen this film over and over, and I enjoy it every time. I know that it is a mixed bag for some people, but I regard this film as a high class film, and um, I guess to each their own. So I love the ideas behind it. Where what would happen if you were never born? And would life have been better without you in it? These are I mean, these are questions a man ended up having to deal with, and I think it was a very tough thing to deal with, harsh realities. Just to
Indeed.
shake someone up. So, but in any case,
Well, speaking of which, Brandon, I know you're not a humongous fan of the film, but you don't dislike it either. So why don't you follow up on that with your
Well,
impressions?
I do think that there is a lot about this film that has a lot of what is that word? Nostalgia
Poignancy.
for people because it's a film that many kind of grew up watching every year. I knew of the film growing up, and but I only really would see it in snatches or references in cartoons and so on. And until like it wasn't until my I think 30s that I actually saw this film in its entirety for the first time. And
wow.
it was just one that I never really had an interest to go through. I had a particular dislike for Jimmy Stewart for many years because I had to do a project on him for drama in high school, and it just, I don't know, it just, I guess I got overloaded with a lot of his films. I've come to respect him as an actor a lot more now, but during my early 20s, I never bothered with it. And then I never bothered with the film later on until, like I said, until my 30s. So I watch it with more fresh eyes, I guess, than a lot here. And though I feel like it's a well-crafted film, I feel like it's an overrated film in many ways, just because I think the nostalgia factor does play into that. But still, like I say, well-acted film. I like the way that they handle it. I think the story is handled well, and darn well, Jimmy Stewart does an amazing job of portraying what he does. Just not a. It is a typical Capra film. So I will give it that. It's just
Indeed.
another take on that particular way.
Hot dog.
Well, I know that Dustin feels very strongly about a lot of different Christmas films of different sorts, and I don't know what your impressions are. Are they fond, or is this overrated, or what is it?
Well, so I'm probably going to surprise a few of you. I have never seen this before. Like, Jesus Christ, what was that?
That was me gasping in shock.
Well, I've never seen this before. I've never caught a second of it on TV. I've never been in the room when anyone else was watching it. I've never heard anyone else talk about watching it. This movie is almost completely new to me.
Wow.
I mean, I know the tropes. I knew kind of what it was about because it gets parodied a lot. But other than that, this was almost entirely unknown, like what I was going to see. Like, I actually thought I had a moment while I was watching it where I was looking at the runtime and I was like, wow, this is a really short movie. Not understanding that it meant there was an hour and 13 minutes left to go, and not that was the total runtime, because I misread the player. So I watched this on Prime, which I usually don't watch much of anything on Prime. And so this was about what I expected. Like, I didn't expect it to be so long, but it was good. I can see why it's kind of such a classic, or at least considered a classic by a lot of people. I didn't hate it or anything. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, I get what everybody's talking about now, but I've somehow avoided it for so long. Like, it's not gotten on my nerves or anything. Like, it sounds like it has a few people.
Well, it's just interesting that's not at all the reaction I expected, but it's a good perspective to have in here, because it is very possible for some things to just not fall on people's radars for whatever reason. So, it definitely happens.
If it was a Christmas story,
Madness.
If it was a Christmas story, I'd probably be complaining, because it's like, you cannot avoid that movie during the holiday season.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think there was a period where in this film's history when you couldn't avoid it. We'll get into
multiple
that.
periods.
Oh yeah, definitely when I was a kid.
We'll get into that though. Now, Jake, you were just aghast at that reaction. So you had best go next.
Now, real quick, I'm curious, Dustin. I have since seen it several times.
I saw the black and white one.
But you talk about how often this one is referenced. The first time I saw Casablanca was after college, and I was like, holy crap, I've seen this whole movie. It feels like deja vu. Did you have that feeling at all with this, or?
Not really. I was mostly just remembering, like every time the Angel Bell Wings thing, like I've heard that like many times before.
Oh yeah.
There was a show called Moral Oral, and there was a parody of that where like the movie was being picketed by a church group, and they were chanting, "Every time you hear a bell, another angel burns in hell."
That sounds like that show. Yep.
And I was just remembering that for a lot more of the runtime than I probably should admit. But no, it was fine. Like it wasn't.
Well, we saw that
fine.
last week. I think wasn't it Gremlins that sampled that scene,
Well,
and
Gremlins
so many other
does.
movies.
Well, Gremlins takes
Yeah.
after this a lot.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's kind of why I was interested, because I know that a lot of for a lot of people, but Dustin particularly, a lot of your Christmas references tend to come from a lot of the 80s ones that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, and those tended to have a lot of movies from like the 40s and 50s as some of their nostalgic
Right.
frameworks. So I just thought that was an interesting connection. But Jake, impressions.
Well, and then of course last year we covered the Home Alone movies, where the first one has that scene, and the second one I think had the scene in French, if I remember correctly. But yeah, for me, I'm going to have to fall into the camp of I thought this movie was inescapable for certainly for much of the 80s. I'm not sure, maybe once some of those 80s films like A Christmas Story became more popular, maybe they edged it out. But didn't TCM even recently do like a 24-hour marathon of this one every year? Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't know, but I would rather have a 24-hour marathon of this than A Christmas Story, to be honest.
But at any rate, I have seen this many times over the years. I couldn't even try to guess when I first saw the whole movie. I think it's a fair assumption that I saw bits of it before I saw the whole thing. But I couldn't even tell you. I grew up with the movie, and I have no memory of when I was introduced to it. It's just always been a part of my Christmas experience as long as I can remember. So it's probably been a couple of years since the last time I saw it. I don't watch it every year. I probably see it every 2 to 3 years, I guess. But it's a good, solid film. I've seen several Capra films, and I'm generally a fan of them. They are a little schmaltzy. There's definitely this one, I think in particular, the acting does go a little over the top at times. It's it's easy for a cynical person to look at it and just like but on the other hand, it does have a surprising amount of darkness to it as well. And
yeah,
it covers a lot of ground. It covers a lot of emotional beats. And
I don't know about darkness.
I would say
he's
so.
contemplating suicide. I would say that's kind of dark.
And not even just that, but it's like,
right.
you've got the potential poisoning of the kid. You've got
you've got alcohol abuse. You've got you've got Potter himself. He is one of the great movie villains. He is a horrible rat bastard of a person.
Oh, totally.
And I love Lionel Barrymore's performance.
He's incredible as Mr. Potter.
Yeah. And just generally, I have fond memories of the film, and I don't mind any excuse to put it in. It's not usually at the front of my queue for the holiday season, but I don't mind sitting down and giving it a visit.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we will get into some of those darker aspects of the story, because I think what I love about the story is that it has a little bit of everything in it, and you get to that happy ending, but without having gone through a lot of sadness and even some scary, kind of disturbing moments to get there. But we'll dive more into that. Brittany, hello. Would you kindly give your first impressions?
Certainly. Well, this is in fact a movie that is in my repertoire. That is something that I watch every year on Christmas Eve. So I am very familiar with this one. In fact, I remember when I was brought into watching this the first time was in our local Bird Theater here in Richmond, Virginia, which is an old-timey classic 1950s theater that is now a historical site. So, yeah, I got to see it in that environment with the whirling organ and all that. So I kind of got the feeling of when it was kind of like released in theaters.
And so that's definitely safe to say you're a fan of it then.
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome. Tammy, are you as much of a fan that you too watch it on Christmas Eve? Not sure what you and Dave's rituals are on that, if you have any. Tammy?
I know she's speaking, but we can't hear her, can we?
Okay.
Nah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can.
Yep.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yep. I don't remember the first time I watched it. I do remember when I was a kid, my great grandma making the little thing about when every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. But at the time, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what she was referring to because I don't remember watching this till I was probably in my 20s or so for the first time. It took me a few times of watching it too to just kind of see everything that he was going through, and everything that he was putting on hold and just kind of like getting the whole thing. You don't get like everything the first time you watch it. But yeah, I would say that ever since David and I have been together, yeah, we usually do watch it every year. It wasn't an every year thing for me before that.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Now, Mo, are you a fanatic about this movie?
Surprisingly enough, I wasn't sure if I thought that I'd seen it all before, or if I was pretty certain that I was just only familiar with like the scenes that you see in other movies, I was kind of blown away by this, honestly. I loved every second of it. It is easily my favorite movie that these guys have had me watch, other than Sullivan's Travels. I mean, it might be one of my favorite movies I think I've ever seen.
Wow.
Nice.
It was, and I did not go into this expecting to enjoy it that much, There's just something about everybody's performance, all the characters I completely buy as these eccentric small town people that they are. It just hit every button for me. And the fact that it is kind of depressing, and I'd go as far as to say a little heart-wrenching at a couple of different parts.
Totally.
It makes it all just work better, I think, than maybe any Christmas movie I've ever seen.
It's got everything.
You really appreciate that spirit by the end of it.
Yeah, it's not Hallmark Channel kind of phony baloney. It's got some real harsh slices of life, but then some really sweet ones too that make the sweet moments all the sweeter.
For sure, and I could definitely see what Tammy's saying. There's lots of little layers to it, and little like subtle bits of different people's performances, or little things around like the dude and his raven and his squirrel and stuff. It's going to be a movie that I watch multiple times a year going forward to make up for all the years that I missed with it.
I don't know how, but I'm not sure I ever realized I somehow missed that Billy has a pet squirrel. I know the raven. I see that every year, but I don't think I ever caught the squirrle somehow.
Billy's got everything. He's like Dr. Doolittle, pretty much.
Right.
This is a special movie for sure. Like it's I kind of feel bummed that I didn't grow up on it a little bit, but I think like really sitting down and properly appreciating it now was probably for the best because I'm old enough to appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, there are some people.
Fantastic.
There are some people I've met, like before this discussion, but like some people I've met that I would have sworn, this would have been part of their lexicon, and yet and their repertoire, and yet it was not. So I mean, it can definitely happen. Now, Kroll, please bring us home in terms of impressions, if you please.
Well, yeah, I saw this I don't exactly remember how old I was. I just remember every year watching this with my grandparents and my mother, and you know, it was just always there. It was always on. This and Miracle on 34th Street, probably my two favorite Christmas movies. I've not seen it for quite a few years, but it was always in my mind of a great Christmas movie. I actually auditioned for a play to be either young George or old George. Unfortunately, I was at the age where I was a little bit too old for the younger and a little bit too young for the older version. So I never got the part, but I always wanted to be in the play. And you know, I've always loved the story. And also, when I was a teenager and a little older, I used to think, what would it be like if I was never born? And I started thinking of all the people that I know and then I've connected together and saying, well, these people wouldn't know this one, this one wouldn't know. So it's like I was like, wow, you know, I definitely have connected a lot of people. You know, not saying I'm the center of any kind of world or universe or way, but there are a lot of people that branch off from me. So, you know, that's pretty cool. And you know, I got the idea from watching this movie. And you know, I've no wish I've never been born, and I've made the statement myself. You know, sometimes you don't think that rough, especially when you're a teenager, and you think that way.
Strange, isn't it? How one man's life changes or affects so many
watching
other
this movie and watching how he comes to the realization, yeah, things are rough, things are hard, but you know, keep it together, things will work out. You know, maybe not the way you want it, but it'll work out. You know, and you know, just it's a great story, and it's a great lesson. You know.
Oh yeah.
And
one it's one that stands the test of time.
Exactly. And that's why it's still beloved. I mean, actually, I'm sure I've seen the black and white version. And I put this on. I also watched it on Amazon Prime, and started watching. I'm like, oh, the black and white version. I'm like, oh, well, I'll just watch it. Because I always prefer color. The fact that it wasn't in color didn't really bother me. It really didn't take anything away at all. I didn't really, after the initial, oh, it's black and white, I didn't really even notice. So I watched it in the way it was originally black and white, and yeah, it was still, you know, just awesome story. Everything was still all there, and all the things I remembered about it, and all the things I've forgotten and got reminded. Another thing too, Potter. I mean, like you said, Lionel Barrymore did such an awesome job, and I wasn't sure, but I kind of figured Drew Barrymore was related, so I looked it up, and yeah, he's the great uncle of Drew Barrymore.
Oh, the Barrymore family is quite the Hollywood legacy family, quite the dynasty.
400 years of acting.
Right? Isn't he John Barrymore's brother? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
And John is like her grandfather.
Yeah, John was her grandfather.
Yeah.
And her grandmother was, I can't remember her first name, but her last name was Drew. So that's where she got her name from her grandmother. Her grandmother was Drew. Her maiden name was Drew, so that's where they got her first name from. And of course the last name Barrymore, so that's where her name came from.
Actually, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, the black and white, because this is the first time I've ever watched it in color, also on Prime, just because I thought, that might be interesting. Let's see how it looks colorized.
I didn't really like it colorized though.
I've never watched the colorized version, and I don't want to because I'm just so against.
I've definitely seen both, and although I prefer the color, the black and white didn't take anything away either. So you know, it doesn't. I don't think it's one of those movies. To me, it doesn't really matter. But I'm one that really loves color, so of course I love the colorized version. But it doesn't really matter which way you watch it.
I'm the same way as you, Dane. I grew up with the black and white, so when I heard there was a colored version, I was like, "Well, no, I'm not going to."
Yeah, I mean, I get the sentiment, and I sympathize with the sentiment that something that's really great should be able to withstand that, but it's like we don't need to needlessly, you know, tarnish it either. But you know, that's a whole other discussion. But
I just didn't think.
Well, I wanted to watch the colorized version in addition to the black and white one, but I just didn't get to it today.
Yeah,
just to kind of see the difference. Because this is a story that I don't think this isn't a very visual like story. That there aren't like special effects that you're looking at.
Yeah.
So I think it'd probably be fine to watch the colorized version of this.
Well, I could think of a lot worse movies, that's for sure. But
Exactly.
well, but my first Brittany, you were gonna say something?
I was going to say, actually, this is the first film where they use this particular kind of snow. So they did
Right.
one special effect that is known through Hollywood now.
Yeah.
Right. I think I read they got a special technical Oscar for the creating that effect. So
Definitely looked real.
cool.
Well,
Yeah, and also they filmed in summer, so you
Wow,
can't really
did they?
tell watching the. Yeah, supposedly it was a very hot production.
That was they did such a great job.
well, so my first impression of this film, I'm kind of in the same boat as Jake. It's one of those movies that's just kind of always been there. And I can't honestly remember the very, very first time I saw it. It just, again, it's just kind of always part of at least the holiday movies that I watched growing up. There were certain ones that were just always on. White Christmas was another one. I kind of wonder if part of it is a generational thing, but part of it is just, you know, what was prevalent at the time. And also we'll get into the kind of sort of public domain status of the movie, but not really. That's a whole other discussion that we'll get into. But as a movie, I think I'm also in the camp of Mo in that it really is kind of a perfect movie because it's got everything in it. It's got romance, it's got comedy, it's got drama, it's got fantasy, it's got Christmas, it's got a lot of kind of dark moments, it's got disturbing moments, even. It has a lot of things to really think about and ponder, and then when it gets to that happy ending, it's very earned. It doesn't feel manipulative in the way that a lot of movies that copied it would later be. Um, and it's definitely Frank Capra all the way through stylistically and thematically. It's totally something that he did. And you can see how much people like Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis and uh, blanking on his name, who did The Green Mile, the film, Frank
Frank
Darabont.
Darabont.
Yeah, how much they take from, especially like his film The Majestic, how much they take from Frank
Oh
Capra.
yeah.
So much. But just as a movie, I think it's really got everything in it, and there's a reason why it's so beloved. And I think it's probably Jimmy Stewart's best performance, which is saying a lot because he's delivered so many good ones. I think it'd be between this one and Harvey, although his character in Harvey, Elwood P. Dowd, he's a character who changes everyone else around him, whereas here, George Bailey is the character who changes, and a pretty big change at that. Not only that, but this was something I noticed when I was an adult, but the setup of this movie, if you were really judicious about it, you could whittle it down to a half hour and you could make it a Twilight Zone episode because it's got, I could totally just imagine, for your consideration, George Bailey, the miserable owner of the building and loan, about to throw away one of God's greatest gifts. What he doesn't know is that George Bailey is about to enter the Twilight Zone. You could totally write it that way, and then Clarence comes in, and then
Hell
boom,
yeah,
off
dude.
we
Then
go.
John Goodman shows up and dunks Potter out of his chair and says, "This gold bricker can walk."
Oh, that'd be great. Which there is a great SNL sketch of like a supposed like alternate ending of the movie where Uncle Billy realizes, oh wait, I remember where I had the money. Mr. Potter has it. And then they all go and they beat him to death. It was great.
Wow.
It's awesome. Definitely look it up.
That does make me. I mean, I know it's getting slightly ahead of ourselves, but what did happen to that money anyway?
I assume Mr. Potter must have kept it. I mean, that's kind of
Well,
a MacGuffin, really.
My thought was that he intended that his entire plan originally, and that my theory changes over time, but recently it's more. I feel like he intended to oh, I just came across this money. It was in this paper, and handed it back just after it was too late for them to stay open.
He
He
would do
could
Mhm.
that.
win
Yeah,
and
probably.
still
That
be
sounds
there.
like something he would do, because obviously he
Totally.
doesn't need the money. He doesn't need to keep the money to keep it, but he would definitely keep it long enough to
And then he
give it
can rub
back
it
to
in
him
the
at the
face of the
perfect moment and
person.
say, "Oh, I guess I had it all along."
Yeah.
Because then they
Well,
would know, oh, he's the one who had the money. So he would also be able to let them know, yep, it was me that kept you closed.
exactly. So, super fast rundown of the plot, and again, super fast because again, there's a lot of movie to get through, and I would hope people would actually go see it. And again, I would be surprised if there are people out there who haven't, and yet there were on this very episode. So indeed, there may very well be more people that haven't seen it than I think. But anyway, so
Surprising.
We can
short.
go one step further. Like, I don't really even know who Frank Capra is.
Oh well, we'll have to fill you in on that one. He did a lot of great films of the 30s and 40s, like You Can't Take It
Mhm.
With You and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and this film.
Another Jimmy Stewart
And
movie.
I
he
know
did,
Fritz
Uh,
Lang. He's pretty good.
well,
it happened one night.
he's totally of a different, well, same time period, but totally different style. He was from Germany and he came over to the United States. Big German expressionist director. But no, Frank Capra actually. So funny you mentioned Germany though. So with Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, which is of course the big Nazi propaganda film of 1936, Frank Capra actually with the U.S. government filmed Why We Fight, which was essentially the United States' response to that documentary for the United States' war effort. And that documentary series is actually highly acclaimed in and of itself. And But this film actually was his return to feature filmmaking after having spent a lot of time making documentaries to aid the war effort for World War II. Um, but super fast plot rundown: George Bailey is a very miserable owner of a building alone in the small New York town of Bedford Falls, thinking of taking his own life when seemingly he's backed up against the ropes for a whole bunch of reasons and feels like he never really got to live the life that he always wanted, full of adventure and excitement. He got bogged down by a job he never wanted in a town he didn't want to stay in, with the girl next door that he was clearly making googly eyes at, but didn't really realize just how much he really loved her until, much later. Um, and is thinking of taking his own life. And with all the people praying for him, God and Joseph send down an angel second class named Clarence, who still needs to earn his wings. And Clarence is set to help George realize just how wonderful of a life he really had. And his way of doing it is by showing him another world, another possible reality in which he was never born, and all of the different lives that he touched when he did exist. And that's the super duper short version. Now, most of the movie is actually set up to that third act, which is kind of an interesting plot structure because
Right.
it is largely set up. It's not real. I mean, it's kind of a flashback, but it's more an exposition dump for Clarence himself to get kind of caught up to kind of serve his client, shall we say? To get it's like, this is your assignment, and this is
Essen-
Well,
essentially, the first 2/3 of the film are Clarence watching a documentary on George Bailey.
basically, yeah. And how fitting, because again, Frank Capra had just come off of documentaries, and there's actually a whole mini World War II section of the movie where they use a lot of documentary footage, and it's like, well, yeah, I can clearly see what was on his brain, and what was on the brains of a lot of the audience that went to see this, because it was 46, so it was just after VE Day and VJ Day. And, so it was still very much on people's minds, but I think they probably didn't want to be reminded too much, which is part of why the movie didn't do especially well commercially when it first released. and we'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, most of the movie structurally is kind of a big exposition dump, but it is very well done because you see George in many stages of his life as a young boy in 1919, and then as a young adult, and then he gets progressively older, and then he looks by the time we catch up to the present, he looks like he's maybe 40 something, maybe late 30s, something like that. But you see all the little things that make his life what it is, all the little lives he touched, the fact that he saved his kid brother from drowning, and he cost him his hearing in his left ear, and the fact that, when his father died, he has to take over the family business that he doesn't want to have to do. He wants to have a life of adventure, but he's a Bailey, and Baileys, do things for others and don't think about themselves. And he's the only one. The whole thing that you can tell it's a Frank Capra film, because Frank Capra films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington are so filled with the idealism of the New Deal that it's very much a product of its time. And you look at the speech that he gives to Mr. Potter, and it's like, yeah, that's totally FDR. And it's something that he's very much someone who thinks about others before himself, and has a lot of courage in that respect. But also, I've heard actually a counter argument to this movie saying that George Bailey is not a good businessman, which the story explicitly says that he's not, and that his father
Yeah.
wasn't.
He's
And
not.
if anything, a character that doesn't really get talked about all that much is Sam Wainwright, who did go off and did become successful,
Right.
didn't turn
Yeah.
into this grouchy, awful, narcissistic monster like Mr. Potter did, but he was kind of like a character that you'd see in like the Hudsucker Proxy or something, with his big cigar and his Manhattan office building and all that stuff. But he was he seems like an okay guy, just kind of you're almost like a cartoon character, like New York businessman, but not like a malicious person either. And boy, does he come in handy at the end. So but that's an interesting counter argument I've heard of the movie.
Now, I will say this one again, and I think Tammy brought up and I think a couple others brought up the idea that, each time you watch something, you get something new out of it. And again, even a movie like this, you've seen so many times. Like I said, I don't know that I caught that squirrel before. But one thing that I had a thought this time that I'm pretty sure I've never had before, and it does slightly call into question just how good of a friend Sam is. He's definitely not the money grubbing old miser that Potter is. And when George recommends that he talks about setting up a plant in Rochester, and George is like, why not here? All those people they put out of work when the plant closed, why not here? And Sam loves the idea without missing a beat. He's like, that's a great idea. And he apparently builds that plant. I guess that was my understanding, that they did build that plant. So I never really thought about it before, but the movie very strongly hints that that in no way really benefited the building and loan. And they also do say repeatedly, like one of the reasons why George is in battle with Potter is he says to him a couple of times something to the effect of this at one point he says this town needs this measly little broken down building and loan, if only to have one place where they don't have to come crawling to you, Mr. Potter. And but given that implication, if Sam put in that factory and Mr. Potter controls everything but the building and loan, does that mean Sam went to Potter instead of George? It kind of, I never thought about that before, but then I thought about it this time, and I'm like, damn it, Sam, you kind of suck as a friend if that's the case.
Well,
again,
George
he
made it
might
pretty
want to
clear he
win.
didn't want anything to do with the deal at the time, because that was one of those key moments where he's really struggling with his wanderlust or whatever.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
I
that
never,
makes
I
sense.
never got a bad vibe from Sam Wainwright. He's just one of those guys who they
Right.
know how to do what they do well, and they're not like bad. They're just sort of a little. He seems like a.
He's a little flighty.
Well, I would call him like a. I would call him benevolently shallow. You know, like he's
Yeah,
not a
that's probably
terribly.
good.
He's not a terribly deep, because like I don't think he was like specifically not wanting to build the factory in Bedford Falls. It just never occurred to him. And he was
Yeah.
like, "Oh,
Right.
gee, okay, great, that's a great idea." Yeah, he seems like one of those people, and I've known people like that who are not bad people. They're just not terribly deep, but there's nothing really bad about them, and it's like, oh well, okay, whatever. But they
Yeah.
obviously do well in life, so it's like, well, you
Right.
can't really.
I mean,
hold
he
it
does
against
try to
them either.
drop, George into the pool, which he ends up dropping both of them, and then everyone jumps in.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was a
He's
tit for
he's
tat. I
just
thought it
mad
was
that,
fun.
that
That
George
was-
stole his date.
Yeah, that wasn't Sam. That was someone else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was someone else.
Yeah,
Oh,
But
right.
it's still a
Oh,
fun
yeah.
scene at the end of that. To me, I didn't think it was necessarily overly malicious. It was more of a, oh, you do this, well, let's do that. It's more of a prank you back for cutting in than a
Oh yeah.
going to
Oh yeah,
drown
I know
you.
that. It wasn't super malicious or anything. You know, it wasn't like dropping pig's blood on you.
It was like
Slightly different.
It was like the innocent 1946 version of something that you might see in like Porky's or Animal
Yeah.
House or something, you know.
It was rad, dude. All those people flying into the pool.
I
Yeah,
know.
it was great. It just
I
kinda,
loved
and
how
then they jumped in too. They were like,
even
"Oh,
the teachers
screw
were
it."
jumping in.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it turned out to be like just
Well,
a
so
simple
that's
revenge, but
that's
everybody had fun
something
with it at the
that's a
end.
very important thing to throw in there is that the movie has such a well balanced set of tones, because like that's a really funny moment, and usually even when there's something serious or dramatic that happens, there's usually some kind of at least a light joke to kind of ease the tension a little bit and to cap off the scene, like a scene that is one of the best dramatic moments, I think, is when she says, "Remember when we threw rocks at this old place? You know, this is what I wished for." And I was like, "Oh man, that hits you right in the heartstrings." And then they sing outside the window, and then of course he he kisses him on the head. And he was like, "Bam!" Hits him with with his hat there. But it's like
Yeah,
the
it knows
movie.
when to bring in the humor when it needs
Yeah.
to be fun again, and it knows when to
Right.
stamp out the humor when it needs to get serious.
Yeah,
Like
it
another
does
great
definitely.
example is that scene where she's naked in the bush.
Yeah, I
And he's
love
like,
that scene. That's so
it's
funny.
That was
hysterical.
that was so great. He's like, "Oh, I could sell tickets,
Right.
and it's like I got a unique opportunity here." And she's
I
just like,
know.
"George Bailey, give me my rope."
Yeah,
Well,
it really
and
shows you what kind of a movie it is, because it's like, oh, we've been having fun for too long. Your dad's had a stroke. Like
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? I realized this as an adult. I was like, this movie is a little racy for 1946 because of like
Oh
that
yeah.
scene, and also like
Yeah.
he's making violent love to me, mother, and it's like how many other movies from 1946 say at that
I was
bluntly,
gonna
you
mention
know?
that myself. That her saying that, in 1946, a woman saying that into her mother,
I
that
know.
he was violently making love to her. I was like, wow, that's shocking.
Yeah, and also you see like a burlesque in the Pottersville, that whole thing. You see
Yeah,
that, you
get the
Yeah.
girls, gorgeous
and you
girls,
see
girls.
it like explicitly says striptease, and I was like, yeah, this is actually kind of racy for the time.
Which, of course,
well,
they use
dude,
that
right
as
out
a
of the gate,
callback
that
on-
little kid's talk about having his harems and stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to have me a couple of harems and maybe 2 or 3 wives.
Wait,
Yeah.
I mean,
for kids.
but they
And
have,
she's looking,
Exactly.
and Mary's looking like, yeah, I want to be one of them.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's a callback to
Right.
that in Back to the Future Part 2 with Biff
yes.
when he
Yeah.
takes
Well,
over,
there's
and it's all not that different.
well, Back to the Future Part 2 the alternate 1985 takes a lot from this, particularly the scene where Marty sees his father's grave. That's right out of this when he sees his brother's grave.
Yeah.
Completely right out of this. But no, this movie, it's very tonally well balanced. It doesn't shy away from the harsher aspects of life when it needs to. And again, when the sweet moment happens, it makes it all the sweeter. Or sometimes it's the shitty aspects of life that have their sweetness to them. Like, for example, they don't have a honeymoon. They end up giving away the money that they were going to spend on a wonderful honeymoon for people other than themselves. And then, they go back. Yeah, George goes back home to the old place that's drafty and leaking and awful. But it's decorated to remind him of his dreams of exotic places and everything. And,
Right.
and it's those are the kinds of things that you look back on in your life and you don't really realize just how much love there is in places like that, in moments like that. I mean, that's as Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting would say, that's the good stuff. And it's absolutely
Mhm.
true. But I mean, I think part of why this movie is so beloved is because it does affect people of all ages. I mean, I think kids can appreciate it for the fantasy of it, the fact that it's Christmas and it's got, a guardian angel, it's got, you know, all these different fantastical things. But then I think adults, especially as you get older, you see this character at a different point in his life, and you think about kind of where you were at that point in your life.
And
And
in Potter, you really see a villain in
totally.
Yeah.
the story,
Villain!
especially when he outright, well, even though he didn't know he had Uncle Billy's money, he didn't give it back neither. You
Mhm.
know,
Right.
so to me, that is the every epitome of what we think like sometimes the rich people do.
Well, there's definitely one thing that stuck out to me with this particular viewing is how the film is definitely of its time in terms of like some of the New Deal rhetoric, but then it's also surprisingly relevant to today in ways that I think a lot of people don't think about, such as
Right.
the fact that it's like, so this was just on the cusp of when, from after the war up until like around the 70s, maybe a little bit into the 80s, that was like the golden period where someone who was working like a minimum wage job or maybe a lower middle class job could actually afford a house. um and this most of the story takes place just before that. And now, and I'm thinking of like the GI Bill and stuff helped give a lot of people their start and that kind of stuff for veterans that served in the war and all that. But it's kind of like today how, you have to work two minimum wage jobs to just barely get by today. And for a lot of people, especially in my age group, it's harder than ever to buy a house and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, we're kind
Yeah.
of back to where we were in a lot of ways. And, there are plenty of Potters running around, and
Oh
plenty
yeah.
of, even with rentals and stuff, the rental
Well,
rates are through the roof and that kind of
he
stuff.
wasn't
But
doing much running. You know what I mean?
nah,
Right.
he was rolling.
Right.
Now I have to say, this movie. Now that we're mentioning Potter, this movie has such a great hero and villain relationship. Which again is very much informed by the politics of the time. But again, it stands the test of time too, because even outside of the New Deal, outside of FDR and continuing into Truman, which Truman would have been president at the time, but continuing even out of that, we all know Potters of different sorts, and we would hope that we would try to be a little bit more like a George Bailey, but maybe not all the way, because again, I think you know part of what does him in some ways is not having as much of a business sense, or perhaps there is something to be said for if one were to be more of a Sam Wainwright, maybe not all the way, to where you're just a total, cheese dick. But like, there is something to be said where like if you're good at what you do and you provide work and stuff, that does help to kind of make everything around you flourish. But again, there have to be people like George Bailey who do that which most people can't do, or don't want to do, or whatever. but it's really in service of the larger message, which is that it was actually something that Steven Spielberg summarized really well during the AFI's rankings of the top 100 best films ever made. He's put it very succinctly, which is that the message of the movie is that every single person's life matters, and I really
Right.
think it's an important message because for a lot of my life, at least in my maybe teenage years and early adulthood, that was something that I kind of struggled with, was like feelings of insignificance and like, oh, my best years have passed me by and I had my shot and I didn't take it and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sounding like I'm talking about Rocky, which actually Rocky does take a lot from this as well, thematically. But it's the idea that not only is it never too late, but it's the idea that, you reap what you sow in life, for good or for ill, because in many ways, Potter's reaping what he sows, because he says, probably my favorite line in the whole movie is, George, I'm an old man and most people hate me, but I don't like them either. So that makes it all even. And it's such a great, self-aware line. It's
Yeah, it was
really,
awesome.
really awesome. But it's also very indicative of, because the part we don't see is inevitable. Because like when he dies, it's like who's gonna come to his funeral, willingly, or
Oh,
because
the
because
group
they want to.
situation.
Yeah,
Right.
no one would be there for him
I
at his
think they will.
deathbed.
Everyone would show up just to make sure he really is dead.
It could be
Oh,
like a ding dong, the witch is dead kind of thing.
Yeah,
Right.
like everybody actually
maybe
wants to
that
see him
night.
dead, not because they're mourning him.
Yeah,
No,
Right.
well,
maybe
but
the night after the movie, 3 ghosts visit Potter.
yeah, maybe.
He was in a Christmas Carol, so yeah.
Right.
Well,
I agree, Dane, what you were saying before about I want to make sure we that I throw in a little bit on the relationship between George and Potter is definitely a really good one. It's a really good one. It's like they are very antagonistic, and yet they still speak to each other civilly. They still will,
Yeah.
and Potter even comes really close to tempting George later on.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
with
Yeah, I
$2,000
mean,
a
Great
year.
picture.
That's
Yeah.
one of the best. That's one of the best
Yeah,
temptation scenes in any film ever, because he
right.
is speaking exactly what George is feeling.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's not particularly nice or good feelings that he's feeling, but they're truthful. And he's just using it for his own ends. But it's the classical trope that
Right.
the devil's temptations are the ones that are founded in inner truth, like that, and that's what makes them so dangerous. And so it's fitting into that
Right.
archetype big time.
It's like an
Well,
I know what you really want kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean that
Right.
is how he really feels, and but of course he's doing it for his own devious ends.
well,
Um,
I don't think that the Potter versus that they are necessarily good versus evil. It really is selflessness versus selfishness,
Selfishness,
and
yeah.
to a
Right.
extreme
Well,
degree in
well,
both.
well. It's
Because Potter,
basically
Potter actually is somebody who cares mostly about the business and the bottom line.
right.
George, when he actually saw somebody drowning, supposedly, he jumped in, even though he was going to jump in to end his life. He jumps in
Yeah.
after him, risking his life just as much without a thought. Both are reckless in their own way, getting to what they want, but
Mhm.
only to what they want, with no thought for anybody else. Well, too much thought for everybody else in one's, and not a
Right.
thought to anybody else in the other.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of where I was getting at with the Sam Wainwright example, is like his big flaw as a character is that he's, a cheese dick and he's shallow, but he's not a particularly bad person or whatever. So it's like if you wanted to look at it through that kind of lens that you're saying, if let's pretend that George was, if he was in more of a for-profit venture, but he was really good at it, and he let's say he was the one who provided people the work, that could get them like a steady paycheck and could provide a viable alternative to Potter's slums and all that, that could be its own kind of benefit. That could benefit the community just as much, but obviously I don't think he has quite that business acumen. His father certainly didn't, and there are plenty of good-hearted people who don't have that. And but they still provide value to the world in whatever way. And go ahead.
Yeah, he wanted
I
to
was
be an
going to say, I
architect.
think the two. Well, yeah, he did want to be.
He wanted to
Yeah,
explore the world and then be an architect. So he
Right.
never wanted to do anything, have anything to do with business. Even his father asked him once. And
Well,
you know.
and
Well, in
here's
this
the other
sense,
here's the other interesting thing though is that the rent collector, who I think is a really great just one scene wonder as a character, but he said, these are dozens of the most beautiful homes you ever saw, and each one cost twice as much, or is worth twice as much as it took to build. And so it's like in his own weird way, he did use his architectural skills in a way
yeah.
that perhaps even surpass what his father was able to do.
Right.
And,
Oh, definitely. He definitely helped.
he put his name on Bailey Park, which that's more than his father could have done. And that's a part of the story that I don't think gets talked about enough, is that, because his father says, in our own small way, I think we are doing something important, which they are. But then George actually takes that and runs with it in a way that the movie does talk about, but it doesn't really put that much emphasis on it, because it's not how George sees himself. It's not how he feels.
Yeah,
but
he doesn't. He sees himself as a failure, not
exactly. But in fact, he had put his stamp on something. He did build something important, something that did.
And all those people, besides his brother and all the other people, all those people would be out of homes, and he saw what it would be like without him. That he brought so much into the world.
But my point is, my point is that all that's true. But he did, despite himself and despite his views on himself, he did manage to advance the goalpost just a little bit further than even his father did, using his passion, using his talents. So it just shows that even if it's not on as large a scale as he wanted, he still did it. And Andy brought Sam Wainwright he had him bring the jobs there. So, I mean, that's no small feat. Now, Jake was trying to say something. I had to finish that off, but go ahead.
I think I lost it.
Okay.
I don't know. But I don't know if this is the point I was going to make, but I'm sure there will be some different interpretations on this, but over the time I've kind of looked at it as Potter in a lot of ways represents essentially, he could be seen as representing pure unfettered capitalism, where it's just all about the economy and the dollar, and human considerations really don't factor in.
Basically U.S. society pre-New Deal.
Basically, yes. Or at least many people have tried to get into this sort of thing.
Yeah,
and one of the things that I'll mention, as far as the timely sort of the timeliness, I think he might also represent trusts. I know that antitrust sentiment was pretty strong around that time, and the whole idea that he controls everything in town, and George is the business alone, the building alone is kind of it's a thorn in their side, but it also prevents it from being a complete Potter from being a monopoly on the town. And so there is that. But on the flip side of it, George he's all about the human element. Like, he understands the importance of the bottom line.
Yeah, they're yin.
He understands. What's that?
They're yin and yang.
Yeah, in very many ways, yes. It's like bottom line versus the human element, and there's really I think, like I said, he understands it a lot better. He understands the business a lot better than his father did.
Right,
definitely better than his uncle does.
Yeah, he still doesn't. He do as well. He does understand better than his father, but he does do close to what his father does. With a few exceptions, he does elevate it a little better with the houses and have his name on it and stuff. And so.
Well, and I think ultimately one of the points of the film, though, is that, it's kind of summed up in Clarence's final comment that, about what success really is.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it's
Well, like they said,
a,
he's the richest man in town. And they weren't talking because he had all that money they handed him,
Yeah.
or the check.
Right.
They were talking about because of his family, and the whole town was behind him, and everyone loves him that much that's why he's the richest person.
Well, and that's
in town.
kind of where I was going with the idea of like when Mr. Potter dies, who's going to come to his funeral? Because they really want
Right.
to. Probably not very many, and
Yeah.
that's really what it says at the end. There is that his richness is in the lives that he's touched throughout his own life, and
Yeah.
it is very karmic in that everyone reaps what they
Mhm.
sow, and he sowed a lot of good seeds, and it came back to produce fruit that was bountiful for him when he needed it most.
What you
Right.
said
And
there,
you see,
Jake.
what's
Yeah, go
up?
ahead.
What you said there just reminded me of an example of kind of unfettered capitalism, like not
Mhm.
considering the human element. There's a story I heard about a while ago where they were designing these dorms at some high-end college, and they basically started with the amenities. It's like, okay, we have a deal with Costco to put in a store here, we have a deal with somebody else to put in one of their stores there, and by
Mhm.
the time they were done, like just cramming stores and like different ways to sell people things into the dorm, they basically had no room left for the people that were supposed to live there.
God,
Yeah.
that's
Like the
sad.
thing didn't have windows, and the rooms were like 5 by 10.
Oh,
Mhm.
jeez.
Well, and that's
That's
something that we run into these days, where like there's the line from Fight Club, when we finally colonize deep space, it'll be the corporations that name everything, and that's
right.
definitely what we see nowadays.
Yeah, Wayland Yutani.
Exactly, but
That was a movie I got to see at the Bird, and I love that. That was great. That was a great crowd to watch that one with.
Fight Club and
Yeah.
It's a Wonderful Life, practically the same thing.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
for kids. But yeah, so we've covered George Bailey as a
Mhm,
character a little bit as far as like what he represents and
mhm,
everything. I think that on paper this character would be okay if it
mhm,
but it's Jimmy Stewart's performance that really puts it over into the stratosphere, because
mhm,
he's delivered tons of great performances throughout his career, but I think this is
mhm,
possibly his crowning glory. This or Harvey,
mhm.
very
Yeah.
different characters though. But
Yeah,
I
they're
really,
definitely.
I really think every time I think about him, I think about this, and I'm like, this really is the
Also, I was
one.
thinking old lace.
Well, and the
Oh,
Philadelphia
that's
story.
I was thinking
Uh,
old laces.
well,
That
I
and
I
this
think
and Ben Affleck are my two favorites.
That was Cary Grant though, wasn't
yeah.
it?
Oh,
That
I'm
was a
sorry.
Capra film. That was a Capra film, but not Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
Stewart's one of those interests. Actually, earlier tonight, I was talking with someone. We're having a bit of a debate about people who get typecast in certain roles and how shocking it can be to see them in different roles. And Jimmy Stewart, certainly in the Frank Capra verse, I guess you could say, he played the guy next door. Like he was the guy you'd like to sit and share a beer with at the bar, or someone that you'd like to see as your teacher, or like he was a good guy that you could see in any role that you might
He
run
was
into.
I mean, I
And
happen to
he
so
think
was
that
it's
he
I
was the
think
Tom Hanks of his day.
exactly, and so it's really interesting to see, for example, what he did in Hitchcock films.
Yeah.
It's an
Well,
interesting
he chose those roles specifically because he knew that he was getting typecast in, because he wanted to show that he could take on darker roles. So that's why he
like
did Vertigo and stuff, and The Man Who
well,
Knew Too
like
Much.
one of my favorite ones, I think, was 2 years after this, was Hitchcock's Rope. He's
Yes,
very different in that one.
one of my favorite Hitchcock films, actually. Now, Dave, what were you going to say?
I was going to say I liked his role in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Oh yeah, another
Yeah,
that's a great film, a kind of a darker Western for
the third
1962.
leg of his career, the westerns.
I know. But he really was kind of the Tom
No
Hanks of
one's
his
talking about his
time.
best role though, as Wiley Burp. in Final Goes West.
Oh, that was actually a really good kind of Twilight years voice
Wasn't that
role
his
for him.
last role?
I think so,
I think
or
so.
very, very close to it. But I
Oh.
remembered that actually from when I was a kid, and I loved that movie.
Mm.
But so he really was the
Yeah,
Tom Hanks
his
of
last one.
his time. But I think I just think he's on fire in this role.
So Wyatt Earp from Fievel was Jimmy Stewart?
Yep.
Wiley Burp, yes, the
Wiley Burp,
the dog sheriff, yes. But I really think this. Whenever I think of him, I think of this role just because I think he understood this character so well, and he really brought him to life in all of his crazy mixed up, well, what Mr. Potter says about him actually is pretty true, where he was like, he used to be so cocky, he thought he could go out there and conquer the world. You once called me a warped, frustrated old man. What are you but a warped, frustrated young man? And it's like he shows all those different angles of the guy, his idealism when he's young, and his kind of crazy mixed up version of him in his adult years, his bitter suicidal self, and then his renewed self after he's gone through his transformative experience and all that stuff. I mean, he really gets all the angles. But one casting choice that does not get talked about nearly as much as I think it should is the kid who plays George Bailey when he is when he's a young boy and he loses his hearing. His name is Bobby Anderson.
Yeah, I think he did a great
Yeah,
job.
that kid was great.
That
Yeah.
kid was so well cast. He talks just like Jimmy Stewart and looks like him. Does a great job of acting too.
Oh
for,
yeah,
like,
especially
he definitely knocks it out
especially
of the
when
park.
he catches the poison with Mr.
Yes.
Gower.
Right.
Yep.
and lot
Yeah.
of really good.
Gets
just-
smacked in the air for it too.
I know. Well,
It's such an emotional scene.
Well, just to.
Oh, dude, his ear bleeds, so that's
I
another
know.
special effect.
Yeah, child abuse in this.
I
It
actually-
was pretty
uh,
rough.
Yeah.
We haven't
And it
heard a
wasn't even
lot
a
from.
parent. It was
Uh,
an
Actually, that
employer.
was not a special effect from what I heard. He actually did get slapped in the ear.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
that's what I
Oh
read.
wow!
Wow.
Apparently, the actor playing Gower was a bit tipsy and hit him
Mhm.
harder than he meant to. H.B.
Yeah.
Warner, yeah.
Yeah. Well, just as we take a very, very brief detour into some of the supporting players, there's a lot of great character actors, and there's
yeah.
Ward Bond is Bert, Frank
Mhm.
Phelan is Ernie,
The
Thomas
original
Mitchell.
Bert and Ernie.
Yeah, which
I love that.
I looked it up, and apparently Sesame Street did not grab their names from this, even though I thought that for years and years and years.
Right.
But apparently it's just a coincidence. But that rumor has persisted to this day. But extra
It's
special,
a big coincidence, you got to admit, because
That
these
it
two
is.
are they're clearly there's a little bit of bromance going on between those two.
totally.
They're buds.
Well, extra special shout out to one of the best character actors of his time, which was Thomas Mitchell as Uncle Billy, who you may remember
Mhm.
also
Yeah, he was
from
fantastic.
from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and you may remember
Mhm.
him as Scarlett O'Hara's father in Gone with the Wind. So
Hey,
No
we haven't
Hmm.
heard from Tammy yet.
yeah, well we heard initially, but yeah, Tammy, anything to add? If not, then because we took a just brief detour there into some of the supporting
Oh,
players.
there she
no, I
goes.
was just listening to everybody.
We took a brief detour there into some of the supporting players,
Yeah,
but
I-
go ahead.
You can go ahead.
Oh shit.
Right, I think that the kid that played young George did a very, very good job, especially in that scene that was a really hard scene with the when he found about the medicine. He just did that so well, and that had to be really hard for a child that age,
Mm-hmm.
to take that on.
I know.
So I get what you guys are saying, that I think he did a very good job.
Well, I think, and we've covered Jimmy Stewart, Lionel Barrymore, one of the best villains in film
He's great.
history. he has no superpowers. He has no nothing other than just being wealthy and owning a lot of things, and no real reason to be terribly villainous other than him just being a warped, frustrated old man. And there have been apparently there's been some other derivative works of this that have attempted to humanize him a little bit more to give some extra dimension to him, and that could be a potentially interesting story.
Well, I think someone also make a joke at some point earlier about him being visited by the spirits.
Yeah,
He
basically.
he is in very many ways a stand-in for Ebenezer Scrooge
He
before
played Ebenezer
visit.
Scrooge in a Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he's been in a number of things over the years. I actually saw him in a movie he did with his brother, Grand Hotel. That was a pretty good one. But
it was a good movie.
He really has a good Scrooge quality to him in this one.
Yeah,
totally.
I've always considered that Alastair Sim's version of Scrooge is a very good, almost caricature double feature, playing alongside It's a Wonderful Life.
Well, and there's a good reason for that. It's because this story is thematically very similar to A Christmas Carol in terms of someone who's in a bad place in their lives.
Could have used some more Muppets, though.
Well, it could. Well, in this case, it's somewhat of his own making, but a lot of it circumstance. Versus like Scrooge, we're led to believe that it's almost entirely of his own making. But in both cases, they go through a transformative experience and they're made into better versions of themselves. And I think what makes this film so wonderful is that, again, I think George is a relatable person, and he's someone who can get to a place of very, very dark, a dark, bitter place, while trying to do the right thing, as opposed to like Scrooge kind of brings about his own fate in many ways, and he very much deserves what is coming to him, except that the message there, of course, is that it's never too late for anyone, even someone like Scrooge. So it just kind of depends. I think what makes this story work the way it does is its build up, because A Christmas Carol works as far as like it's a very, very short book. You can read it in like a few minutes. It's really short. But it works well for what it's trying to do. But yeah, I think as far as that kind of character, that we all know someone like Mr. Potter, either in our own lives or on a larger scale. We've all known someone like that, and it's not really his story, but he's a good, in many ways, he's a good representation of what George could become if he did give into his dark side, his bitterness, his resentment and all that.
I did want to mention that there was another film that took this story and then placed Mary Bailey as the main character of the story, and then played it out through that.
And that would be interesting because, I was just about to get to Donna Reed there. I think out of all of the leading ladies that Jimmy Stewart played against in his career, I think she's possibly the best. They have amazing chemistry together. You really buy them as a couple. And
definitely.
Yeah, they look good, almost too good. Like, it's like, I found myself old manning it. Like, look at those kids, whole world ahead of them.
I know. Well, and she just
swept up in that young love.
Well, and she gives him those looks.
You want the moon, Mary? You know what? I'll just give you the moon. I'll throw a lasso around it
and pull it down. Yeah. Well, but she just looks at him so full of love, and it's one of those loves that is born very early on, as we see. I mean, one of my favorite early scenes.
Right when she was a little girl, she was like,
"Yeah, George Bailey, I'll love you till the day I die." And it's like, well, that says a lot when you know that early, and it sticks with you the whole way through.
even when he looks right at her and calls her brainless just because she doesn't know what was going, a coconut or whatever.
Don't
It
like
was
coconuts. Say brainless.
right.
Don't you know where coconuts come from?
As if where it
Whips
comes
out that
from
Nat
is
Geo.
what is all that matters.
Oh, I know.
Don't you know, two birds bring it on a line.
That's right.
He's so busy with the coconut, you know she didn't like it though.
Tree bark. And real quick in reference to like that, is she obviously is the girl that wants him, and he does notice her, but more like as a friend, as someone who's there, and like, you know, until of course he sees her at the dance and he realizes, well, you know, she done grown up good. But then of course the other girl there, we got to mention Violet, who is played
She's
by
great.
She is
Gloria
such a
Graham.
tease.
Gloria Graham, that was one of her first roles. That was certainly one of her first big roles, and
Did a great job.
she did a fine job with it.
She's awesome because wouldn't she be great in like a film noir as like the femme fatale, you know?
Didn't she play a couple of those roles? I could swear
Probably.
she did.
I was kind of surprised by that character, because we get that line like when they're like little children. It's like, you like every boy. What's wrong with that?
I know.
Wow,
that's great.
That's a lot for this time period.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm saying. The
like a
movie's kind of
risque
racy
character for
its-
sure.
It's
you
kind
know,
of a racy
like, all
movie in
throughout.
many ways.
Of course. Now that I've seen
Adult dialogue for children.
I know.
Well, and now that
There's
I've
that part
seen
later where she like sees George walking across the street and she's like, "Hold on, boys, I think I got a date, but hang around just in case," or something like that.
And they wait, which is the great part. They wait.
But there was that movie that came out a couple years back. Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool, that was all about her final, like, her toward the end. And it's like, now that I've seen that, I definitely can't look at this character without thinking like, well, she was probably playing to her strengths here.
Yeah, she's really great as like the you know the femme fatale or
the other love interest possibly for him. You know, I mean,
yeah.
But she had eyes for him too.
Yeah,
and I did want to shout a couple of the ones we mentioned in passing, like Ward Bond. It was like everywhere in the 30s. He was like the character actor, so that was definitely. And Thomas Mitchell actually is an Oscar winner for Stagecoach. So
that's right. Stagecoach, and then Ward Bond was in The Searchers. So we've got the John Wayne connection there.
You definitely a few John Wayne films there. I think Henry Travers probably did a couple too. I could be wrong.
Well, and we got
like in the movie.
Henry Travers, of course, is our Angel Clarence.
Yep.
We can't forget, and he's a
hoot.
He really is one. You may remember him from The Invisible Man, actually, earlier role of his.
I remember him in a movie called I Married a Witch.
But Clarence is a great character in and of himself because he he has the IQ of a rabbit, according to Joseph. Great vote of confidence, Joseph. Thanks a lot.
Right.
But God says yes, but he has the faith of a child, and it's like, well, that's that's what ultimately does it. But yeah, but it's interesting some of the cosmology of this story here, because they're going on that trope of angels having been deceased humans, and I'm like, well, no, but okay, I'll go with it. That's a very common thing in a lot of these kinds of movies, but
and TV shows like Charmed and stuff.
Yeah, well, because if you're talking strictly, biblically or whatever, then they are their own creatures that are just pure spirit. But whatever. Yeah, but it's an interesting,
like multiple eyes and stuff.
Yes, exactly. They're not exactly like Hallmark versions of them or anything.
They're very Lovecraftian, actually.
Actually, yes, very much so. Very, very cool. A lot cooler than we're used to seeing. But but it's interesting that one of the aspects of this that I think it's so it's so cheesy in a lot of ways, but
Mhm.
it's so classic relative to like you could do this stuff in like the 30s and 40s and nobody thought of it
Mhm.
as anything corny or whatever, but just the fact that they're represented by galaxies and stars and things like that. I mean, that's just a cool way to do it. And
Right.
we have to kind
Yeah.
of use like now
It
the
was
40s were not above
Mhm.
actually showing like people with wings with like those cotton candy looking clouds and stuff. Like you see
And
movies
you
and like
see the strings that they're
yeah,
floating on.
Mhm.
you see like
and
Three Stooges shorts did stuff like that. They were not above,
Mhm.
that kind of
Yeah, this
cheesy
actually had some dignity to it.
it did, but also because like again at that time they were not above that because it wasn't seen as cheesy yet. It was too early, for that to be seen as
well,
cheesy or whatever. But this one, as kind of obviously low budget as it is, it's great because you kind of have to use your imagination as to what they look like, and they even tell Clarence to like sit down, and it's like, well, obviously we can't see them do that, but we just picture the scene in our head and it works.
it's a
I like to
great
think they're
great setup
aliens, you know.
because the movie itself is 2/3 flashback,
Hmm.
but that's the thing is that that flashback pays off
It
when you
does.
finally get to that, because the part that everybody really thinks about when it comes to this, the part that's done over and over and over again, or in other mediums, is that last third
Yeah.
of the movie.
Well, just like Home Alone, the last third is all
Right.
that people really
Yeah, I mean, it's all
reference. So,
set up
And
for that.
and it
Yeah.
is interesting when you watch this. It's kind of hard. It's easy to forget how short the alternate world sequence actually is
uh-huh.
relative to the rest of the film. Um, but the setup for that, we were talking earlier about the humor and all this. First of all, there's the humor of George had been about to jump off the bridge, and then Clarence did to save him, and then that whole conversation they're having that whole crazy weird conversation with the guy right there who I guess is like the bridge keeper or whatever, and
Bridge operator.
yeah, and I just love one thing I always loved, that I always thought was hilarious, is that guy just watching their banter back and forth, and every now and then he'd get ready to just kind of spit in the bucket, and then Clarence would say something that just makes him stop short, and he's just like,
What?
"What?"
What'd you say?
And then, and then finally, it gets to the part where George asked him, "Well, how old are you?" And he said, "What was it, 200 and whatever last
293.
March?" Yes.
293, I think.
And the guy just falls over and runs away. But like the way he looks at them like they're crazy, I
Right.
just always found that
Well,
amusing.
actually, that age thing was actually done in Nick's bar, which
No, it wasn't.
yeah.
No, what was it was the I think it was in the first part, wasn't it?
Mm-mm.
Oh
Well,
no! I actually yeah, I think you might be right.
But
Yeah, I think you're right. He did. He asked him, and Nick was like, "All right, out you two."
yeah, that whole scene
Yeah,
there is hilarious with just like because you see Nick prior to the alternate, reality
Right.
section, he talks normally and then he talks like a cartoon gangster, and it's just hilarious.
were you trying to say something, Brittany?
Yeah. Actually, I was going to say what gets the toll worker to go think all crazy. First, he's like, oh no, he does mention his age, but he mentions his age since he's been dead, which
Oh
makes the
yes.
toll worker first spit out, and then he says, "Oh, you should read Tom Sawyer's new or Mark Twain's new book."
Yeah, that he's
That
writing
he's
in
writing.
heaven.
Right.
Which it does kind of make you wonder if you're in heaven and there's no like conflict or whatever, what do you have to write about? Everything's great here. Yay, I don't
Well,
know.
there's
Was that your reading of it? I always kind of read it as he was working on a book. Twain was working on a book when Clarence died.
yeah.
That was kind
Well,
of my
no,
interpretation.
it couldn't be because he died in well actually wait no well he would have died I did the math on this, so he said he was 290 something next May. That's what he says in the bar. So I did the math and it would have been 1653, which I guess that maybe that would have been his birthday. So then I don't know how
Ah.
old he would have been, but it definitely would have been before the time of Mark Twain, because Mark
Oh,
Twain wrote in
Makes
the
sense.
1800s.
did anybody else get the? Well, actually, very few people have seen the series, but I can't. Whenever I thought about that scene where he jumps in after him and the logic, well, I jumped in off the bridge to prevent you from jumping off the bridge to kill yourself.
Right.
Very similar to the logic of a series called Zetsubo Sensei, where the guy is hanging himself and the one person
What if I
helps him
died?
stop. I could have died.
It was kind of great thinking though, because he knew George well enough that George would save him. So
Yeah.
George can't kill
Yeah,
himself if
Well,
he's
exactly.
trying to save him.
and it's not out of nowhere that he would know all this stuff about George, which that gets me to the element that I picked up on as an adult is after having watched a lot of Twilight Zone episodes, and that obviously came, in the 60s. So after this, and I wouldn't doubt that they probably were inspired at least somewhat by this. Now, most of those stories had a dark twist to them where people tend to get what they deserve in the style of like the EC comics, like Tales from the Crypt and that kind of stuff, except for the notable example of the Art Carney episode where he gets to literally become Santa Claus for a time. That one actually ends very happily, and it's a very moving story. And this one has a lot of a Twilight Zone setup, which I indicated in the beginning of the episode, but then it just has a huge amount of setup, but it allows for that payoff to be so great, much greater than it would have been if they'd have done it in a half hour like the Twilight Zone was. But they don't skimp out on the fact that when it needs to be kind of creepy, it can be, because like the score in particular, he's like, say that again. Sure, you can hear out of it his ear. And like the score that plays under that is actually pretty unsettling. And then there's that one shot where Jimmy Stewart, after having seen his mother and his mother doesn't remember him, stares right into the camera, and he looks like he's at the end of his rope, and his mind is blown, and
Oh
it's like,
yeah, he did such a great job, looking like he was completely lost it, like he's like ready to go to the loony bin, like everybody wants to do anyways.
I know, and there are some shots in that whole part of the film that are actually kind of noirish, like the shot when he's looking around his house, which no one's lived in for 20 years, and you see just the silhouettes of him and Bert and Ernie. Like that's right out of a film noir or like a true crime story, like
And
In
also
Cold
when he
Blood or
goes
something.
to Mary, and he's like, to the librarian, and she's like, let me go, try and get away from him, and he's like, my wife, and she's like
Yeah,
screaming, and he's
he's
still
got that
chasing her.
crazed look in his eye. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like my point is when the film needs to be kind of creepy, it can be. The music really accentuates that in the same way that like when A Christmas Carol, when it needs to be creepy, it can be, like with the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come and all that stuff. Very similar.
One thing I
But
find really interesting about this movie is it almost isn't a Christmas movie.
uh-huh.
It's majority of the movie has nothing to do with Christmas time.
Yeah.
It's just
Well,
kind of the backdrop for the final bit of the movie.
And I like that they don't shove the Christmasness of it down your throat to nearly the degree as a lot of other Christmas films do. The fact that
Right.
the climax and everything, the fact that it does take place at Christmas, it makes the whole thing all the sweeter. I think it could work even without the Christmas setting, but I just think it makes it
Oh yeah.
better. And I think part of why I think the movie does kind of impact people in a different way, especially around the holidays, is because for a lot of people, this is something that they put on every year and it's a great thing. Sometimes if someone's, life's not going so well at this time of year, as happens, because Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, but it's also a time when like suicide rates spike up and that kind of stuff. So, things are not always great for people. And so this one, if you're not in the right mindset for it, it can be kind of a tough sit. I mean, it's not all miserable because, again, part of the point of it is you have to go down into the depths of misery in order to get back up out of it and realize that, no matter how bad things are, that you really do have a wonderful life and you have touched the lives of people that you don't even know. to the degree to which you've impacted their lives. So it means it's for effect, but I've noticed that phenomenon as well. So it's worth throwing that in there. Again, I argue that it's very much for the intended effect, but I can see why, like, there are I've noticed there are people who can't really handle a lot of serious themes in movies, and that's kind of to their detriment. But particularly, when it does come to Christmas time, depending on what you have going on in your life, this movie doesn't sugarcoat when it needs to be tough. It is pretty tough. So that might
Yeah, I can see
rub
it put
someone the wrong
someone
way.
in a bad way if they were like in a bad mindset already going into it,
Yeah, but again, it's for
Mm.
a larger purpose. So but
Right, but it
it's
might be
worth
one you
pointing
want to
out.
catch on the upswing from that depression, not as you're
Yeah,
taking the
Mhm.
nosedive.
exactly.
But then again, maybe
Mhm.
they can make it through the whole thing.
Well, yeah, I mean that's
Right.
kind of why I argued that point of it, because I think it can help you to realize that because like even Clarence, we on Earth tend to measure our worth and our existence in terms of money. But then the angel comes and says, that why would you kill yourself for money? And because obviously money means nothing in heaven. And it's just the idea that we measure ourselves in these ways that we've kind of invented, because money doesn't exist
Yeah.
in nature. It's something we created, and it's a way of representing worth.
Well, I have a
Well,
question.
as George says, it comes in pretty handy down here.
Yeah.
But that kind of factors into my earlier comments about, 'cause, yeah, you're right. Money is entirely a human construct.
Go for it.
So I have a question. So do you think that this movie holds up today? Like
Oh,
how many
totally.
of you guys, everyone, how many of y'all think this movie holds up?
I think this movie holds
Oh,
up today.
this movie definitely holds
This
up.
movie's totally fine today. Like I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
It definitely holds
Yeah.
up.
Are you going to argue? Are you setting us up to argue the antithesis, or?
No, I was wondering how many people would feel like it still holds up and it's still relevant.
If anything,
Oh, yeah.
if anything, I think it's even more relevant in some ways. Not like the World War II stuff. It
Right.
would have been a pretty fresh wound in the hearts of a lot of people, and that's part of why it didn't do so well, because people were reeling from all the people that they lost, and that kind of stuff. So that part hasn't really stuck with us, but I think
yeah.
I
everything
tried.
else.
Though, Dane, you say that though, but the best picture winner the year this came out was
The
The Best
best years
Years
of
of
our
Our
lives.
Lives, which was also very pointedly about coming home
Yeah.
for more. And
Well,
that was also an excellent film.
that was also that was what the movie was about, like explicitly. It wasn't,
So true.
it wasn't like an aspect of it that people were like. I'm thinking a good example of that in my lifetime was one of my favorite movies that I've seen in my lifetime that came out in my lifetime, which was Up in the Air. And that movie
Yeah, good one.
that one doesn't sugarcoat a lot of things about job loss and all that. And then guess when it comes out? 2009. The recession's still a huge thing. People are
Right.
still largely out of work. So that certain things that can kind of rub people the wrong way, and I'm sure it did here. But but that aspect of it, the World War II part, that obviously doesn't have the same significance to us that it did then. But I think everything else, if anything, it's kind of more relevant today.
Yeah, there's still a lot to take
Right.
out of it. I mean,
Well,
and the
in
World
that,
War II stuff is relatively brief, all things
yeah.
considered.
Well, and in that, I think a lot of the struggles of like a young couple, trying to just make it in the world and all that, a lot of people can't afford, if they can afford a house, they probably can't afford that nice a one, and that kind of stuff. So I mean,
Right.
that part has
Well,
definitely held up.
that one very definitely was a fixer upper, which
Well,
I mean,
she did a good job with it. Yeah.
It's a beautiful, like as a house, it is a beautiful house. It just needs all that work, and obviously that's what they do with it. But as a
Right.
house, it's like, man, that is a mansion. It just, but isn't that a great metaphor for the movie? It's, the idea that you can make something beautiful out of something that.
well, wasn't it what they called the Waldorf Hotel or something
Well,
like that?
they said that as a gag, but no, it was the 320 Sycamore, and it was the I can't remember what the name of the building was, but it was
Yeah.
clearly it was a nice house at one point, and it went to neglect. And George,
Mhm.
despite being the great futurist that he purports himself to be, he doesn't see the potential in it. She does, and through her dedication, she really makes it into a home that I think would be the envy of just about everyone else in that town.
Actually,
Go ahead.
well, you just hit on. You just hit. I don't know if you intended to, but you hit on one of the fun things about George versus Mary. She does make googly eyes at him from early on, and they do have a great deal of chemistry. Although sometimes it is kind of weird and prickly at times, and sometimes they just don't know what to do with it. Like one of my favorite parts is when they're kind of sort of flirting with each other, and you got that dude on the porch who's listening
Yes.
incredulously at that,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
he comes out, he's like,
Kiss her, don't talk
"Youth
to her
is
to death."
wasted on the wrong people," and I'm like,
Why don't
"Yes,
you kiss her
it is."
instead of talking her to death?
But
That was great.
yes, but basically they are stupid in love, and they are excellent. But there's one major disconnect between them, and that is that George is convinced that no happiness could ever be found in Bedford Falls, and Mary is convinced that there's no need to ever go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And they have completely different viewpoints on their hometown, and that it really is one of the conflicts that he has to resolve before the end. But which he does, but it is one of their main sources of conflict throughout the movie is that
Well, he
he
believes
is
that happiness is out there somewhere,
Yes.
and he has something that I have struggled with a lot in my life: the idea that happiness and meaning is out there somewhere instead of inside, or making the best of where you are in your life and that kind of stuff. So that's something I've struggled with myself. But she's way ahead of him in a lot of ways, and she, through her efforts on the house and everything, she, in some ways, you could argue that she's more of a futurist than even he is, because she takes the potential of this house that structurally, is a perfectly fine house, is just in bad shape, and she makes it into, I think, a very impressive home that I think anyone would be thankful to live in.
Which ultimately comes into play later when he begins to build Bailey Park, which honestly, I don't think George thought of that as well. That's where he could use his creative talents of what he thought of building things in his own hometown.
Yeah. Well, but it also makes the point that because you see the scene when he destroys his models of the bridge and all that, that he's still thinking about his dreams and all that stuff. But again, it's like in some way, he did get to do what he wanted to do. He just didn't think that he did, and
well, he seemed like he was happier, obviously right before the money went missing and it kicked off the whole final sequence of it. He seemed like he was settling into his life, and
he was finding himself a little bit. And really, if you look at the end of the film, a lot of it is and being happy with who you are, where you are, wherever you are. And in a way, that ending bothers me, but because there's that sort of that thought of, sometimes you just got to quit striving for what you want to do and just do what you have to do. But and that's a good one for this day and age. But
well, you could read it. You could read it that way, and I think what it's ultimately, I think, trying to say is that it's never too late to find meaning in your life. That and in fact, that it was there all the time. In your Yeah, and again, I'm making the point that I think he did get to exercise his talents in ways that he didn't even think that he could. But yeah, go ahead.
You can be so laser focused on a goal that you completely miss what's going on around you, and I think that is probably. I think those are both perfectly good readings of the ultimate what happened, because he did learn to be happy with where he was. Now, was it because he settled, or was it because he realized what was already there?
Yeah.
Or was
Well, I
it
think
both?
he
It could
realized
be
he was
both.
already
models and
there.
still
I
Well,
mean,
so,
I love how he's like, I'll never want to be married, blah blah blah, and like right when he's saying that, it's like all of a sudden he
Mhm.
just starts kissing her, and then the very
yeah.
next scene is
Right.
them get married. It's
Well,
like,
and again,
Right.
it's like that feels like what he's saying in that moment there. That's one of my favorite scenes because it's so powerful. They hold on that one shot for such a long time, and they're so
yeah,
uncomfortably close to each other. But it's like what he's saying is he's really at war with himself in that moment, and
yeah,
Mhm.
but
'cause he knows he wants her, but he also
yeah.
wants to leave.
Yeah, I mean, but that's really what that scene's about, and it's like she just loves him for him, and you know, it's just I think that's such a powerful piece of acting there, and
Yep.
Right.
but and the fact of the matter is that she is a good match for him. She's someone that I think anybody would want to be with.
Oh yeah,
And
oh yeah. She and I remember another scene a little later. He's like, Mary, why'd you marry me? You could have married Sam or all these other people. And, it's just she's loved him right from being a little girl.
mhm,
And she loved his character. I mean, he saved he saved his little brother right off the bat. I mean, he was already a great hero to a lot of people, even as a kid. And she
mhm.
saw that, and she was drawn to him.
Right.
Yeah, it's
And
just it's a great, go ahead.
Definitely a great love story too.
another thing I want to mention real quick on the Bailey Park thing, there is that nice scene where you see him helping Martini move to his new house and what have you, and that was something that they, again, he was doing these big transformative things and didn't even realize that he
Mhm.
didn't even. But I'd not realized this, and I was reading some trivia that kind of amused me on this. But apparently, that scene was partly Frank Capra doing a little nod to his family coming from Sicily and all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And apparently, Capra is the Italian word for goat, which I didn't realize.
yeah, I
And
love
that
that.
scene, that goat was such a nice, prominent part of that scene. I just
That's cute. Well,
find
and
that amusing.
keep in mind this was still during the time when Italian Americans and Irish Americans were not really considered, white in the classical sense, or
Right,
like, on par with like Anglo Americans. And
right.
so that's an interesting element to throw in there.
Hmm.
And then what I don't know why I know this. It's just because the version that I watched as a kid on VHS, it was the original uncut version is what they purported it to be. And I've not seen any other source that talks about this, but during the World War II section, in every other version you're likely to see, Joseph said that, Harry outdid them all, blah, blah, blah. He saved the transport and he took down 15 planes. The version that I remembered watching growing up, same exact movie, but then the line that's in there, um, and I've never seen anyone talk about it, but it's Joseph said he shot down 15 Jap planes. And I'm like, oh, gee whiz, there, Joseph being racist and jingoistic for the United States for some reason, even though you're supposed to be Middle Eastern. So,
But did he
yay,
lose
Oh,
his
the movie is from
chin?
what, 1947
1946.
or
So
something? Yeah.
1946. So
Right.
it's not exactly surprising, but I was just like, I've only ever seen it in that one VHS release. I've never seen it in any other television airing or whatever, not even in the 4K Blu-ray I have. So it's like, you know what? That's probably I'm not really for,
I
stuff being
I think I
removed, but at the
remember
same
hearing
time,
that line, and maybe it was on TV when I first saw it as a kid, because
mhm.
it was the 80s.
Well, but out of all the like missing lines and
So
stuff,
I
I'm like,
definitely feel like I heard that before.
yeah, but out of all the missing lines I've ever heard of in my life, I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with that not being in there.
Right, right, right. But
I mean,
I
Yeah.
remember hearing it this time, going, didn't they say something a little different than that? Like I
mhm.
remember thinking that, and I couldn't remember exactly what it was. But then when you just said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's it. That's what I
Yeah,
remember hearing.
It's not hardly surprising given the period.
Oh
But
yeah,
it's
I
like
mean,
you know.
and or the black
It's
lady
still
maid
jarring,
that
yeah.
Yeah, well,
she
it's
made.
it's jarring to modern ears, and it's also jarring because I'm like, why would this character, based on his setup, be rooting for the United States and using that kind of a racial slur? It's like that makes no sense.
Right.
But it's just kind of an amusing thing I remembered. But
Well, as we said, a product of its time in some
very
ways.
very much so.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you were just mentioning the was it Annie? I think it was. She's an element that kind of
Oh yeah, the housekeeper.
mixed feelings about it. Although I did like
Could have been
the
a lot
line
worse.
about I was saving it for a divorce if I ever
Yeah, if
got
I ever get a
married.
husband.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was great. I
That
mean,
was kind of
yeah, I think the way like when George like, why don't you sit down so you can hear us and
Yeah, that's a
you know,
great. Yeah,
it kind of felt like he was being
yeah.
rude to her. I mean, obviously she's been with a family for a while, and yeah, she's a maid, but usually you kind of treat the maid more like a family member when they're
Oh,
for a
he
long
was
time.
just joshing around.
yeah.
And
Yeah, and if anyone
it
was
just came across as a little bit rude to me. But
well, if anyone was eavesdropping that obviously, then I
Yeah, I
could
was
see
gonna
someone
say, like,
doing
I
it.
don't blame him one bit because I would say something like that to someone. Well, he said it in a very funny way. Like, why don't you pull up a chair, then you can better hear everything that's going
Right.
on.
Yeah, and I think at the
yeah,
end
and
he
then
was like, "Did you
she
get
does give
that?"
it back
You
though.
know?
She goes, "Well, I would if I ever heard anything worth hearing."
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about time one of you brothers said it.
I thought their relationship with her was pretty cute, all things
Yeah.
considered. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, it's
Yeah.
the type of a situation now that you raise an eyebrow at, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
it could have
knowing
been
it
a
could have been a
lot.
lot
movies,
worse.
they probably.
Yeah, this was in
I
the
think
same year as Song of the South. Keep in mind, so it could have
Oh
been a whole lot
yeah.
worse.
just taking into
Yeah, it could have
account
been a
their
lot worse. I get it could
personality
have been a
as a
lot worse. I
family.
was just, in my opinion, seemed a little bit
Right.
harsh, but
Yeah.
Right.
Well, let's see. So we've covered off the characters. We've covered off
Pretty much.
the plot,
I don't know if we
basically.
really did a shout out. Just speaking of that scene just then,
Mhm.
Mrs. Bailey, of course, is played by Beulah Bondi, who,
Yeah, I love her.
if I'm not mistaken, I think she played
I've
Jimmy
seen
Stewart's
her.
mother at least 4 times.
She's great.
She
They have
did a
great
lot.
chemistry together.
They
Couple of really
do. They
adorable
definitely do.
scenes. She's quite a looker too for an older
Yeah.
gal, and she recently widowed in this movie. We could have got one of those cheap Bailey Farms houses together.
And we don't get
but
a
no,
lot
she was
of
one of the
scenes
favorite. God,
What's up? So what's up?
oh, she was one of my favorite like side characters in the movie.
Okay.
Well, we talked about that. We talked about George Bailey's kids are not really emphasized all that much, with the notable exception of Zuzu, which is such a weird name for a kid. But the line they're not there either, George. What, Zuzu's pedals. It's like, there's no way that Clarence would have known about that. So that's a part of why that's significant, and because only George would know that those were there. But no, she's probably the most memorable of the kids, just because they put a special emphasis on
Yeah,
her.
we get a bigger scene with her. But
well,
actually,
the girl playing the piano too.
Yeah,
There was
Yeah.
a movie. Does anybody remember the movie that utilized that character Zuzu in the pedals that, of course, he takes and puts in his pocket? And like Zuzu pedals was like a
It was a Warcraft reference, but the name of Zuzu was revealed actually not too long ago in the choice of the movie. When he says, "My Zuzu, my little ginger snap," well, there was a product, a Zuzu ginger snaps.
There you go. Well, that's a reference that would have meant something to people at the time that has not endured to this day.
Yeah, that definitely didn't stand the test of time.
Yeah, most of this movie does, but that part did not.
And him saying "hot dog," that's
yeah, well, all the lingo and stuff,
Yeah, the lingo is definitely.
Well, and even I think even the hee-haw thing, I think that was just something internally that their particular group of friends did. That wasn't like a saying or anything.
I think no, hee-haw was a saying.
Oh, it was?
It was.
Well,
Well,
it's
yeah, but it still may well have been an in joke with their
Well,
particular
it
thing.
may have been, but it
Yeah.
definitely was. It definitely
that's
was
that's
something.
that's how it came across to me, like something that
Right.
their group specifically said. But it and specifically Sam Wainwright having kind of been the progenitor
Mhm.
of that. Um, and but so we've covered off pretty much all the characters there.
I think his
I-
parents get kind of, it seems like, overlooked, obviously, because there's so much other great stuff in the movie. But the couple of scenes he does have with his parents are great. I especially do
Yeah,
like the dinner table scene where he's talking with his dad.
Pa Bailey's not in a lot, but he does. He's very effective in the scenes he's in.
If I
as
remember correctly,
Samuel S. Hines.
If I remember correctly, Pa Bailey was also the father of in that 4th of July movie with James Cagney.
Oh, Yankee Doodle Dandy, which I
Yeah.
love that movie.
Was he in that one? Yeah, I guess so.
I love that movie. We got to talk about that around 4th of July, next 4th of July. I think that'd be a good pick. His scene with his father at the dinner table, it kind of has a Peter Parker's last talk with Uncle Ben kind of feel to it, except that he
for sure.
But he actually treats his father well in that moment. But still, it has all the stuff they talk about is pretty foundational to what he will later become. So that's
I like how he tells George that he was like born older or whatever when they're talking about his brother, and he has to kind of like turn his good ear towards him. And I don't know, there's something about it like almost choked me up a little bit.
Oh, I know. Well, there's a lot of moments in this that are really, they pull at your heartstrings. Like the moment that really got to me this time that I didn't think about in the same way was just the idea of so Mary, like I mentioned, she's very much ahead of George in so many ways. And one of which is that, she threw her rock, wished for exactly what she eventually got, which was him in that house. It's not quite in the luxurious form that perhaps was envisioned, but it was luxurious enough for them at that stage in their lives. And, it's like that moment for me really, I don't know, it got to me because I'm like, that would be just a wonderful thing to have someone, feel that way about you and to kind of wish for that kind of a life with you, even if it's in kind of bad shape financially or whatever. It's like, she really is ahead of the game with him, and it's just that's a really sweet, sincere moment there. And oh yeah, we should probably mention because we've covered so much of like plot and everything, but as far as alternate realities go, Bedford Falls versus Pottersville, Pottersville definitely looks like it's like Atlantic City almost,
Yep.
And it's definitely looks like it's gone to seed in many ways, and it's very, very tacky, lots of showgirls and casinos and things like that. And I like the kind of obviously low budgetedness of this movie because you see some stock footage in that scene and in some other bits, which they must have clearly just grabbed some from the from whatever studio resources they had, and especially all the war footage and the obvious rear screen projection with some characters being inserted into scenes that they were clearly not filmed in, that kind of stuff. That kind of makes me smile to think this great movie, which clearly didn't have much of a budget.
I do want to say with the Pottersville sequences, I personally, I don't know what it is about them, but I really like alternate world stuff, like the idea of if this, like a parallel version, alternate universe, whatever, or just like in this case, like a simple change in the timeline, one individual gone, what would be the differences? And
the butterfly effect.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know. I'm just intrigued by seeing these kinds of things on screen. So that's one thing that I think each time probably that I watch those scenes, probably more and more as I get older, I look at them kind of, I guess, looking for the differences or whatever. But yeah, I find them pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, and again, Back to the Future Part
Indeed.
2 derives a lot from even that part, but
Mhm.
besides the graveyard scene, but even that part with like Hill Valley, the way that it looks like the alternate Pottersville, But yeah, I mean, we've covered off a good chunk of everything. I mean, I think the only thing we could really say is maybe the ending. The fact that it all does culminate with like kind of like the curtain call for a play in a way, with all the major characters coming back and culminating with the fact that no man is a failure who has friends, and the good karma that George was spreading, it comes to fruition when he needs it the most. And indeed he did have a wonderful life, and indeed his life really did matter, in a way that he didn't expect. So any particular well, actually one particular standout about that is the fact that the bank examiner and the police and all that stuff, that they get in on the joy too. They get into the spirit of
Isn't it
holiday.
wonderful?
Right.
I'm going to jail.
Yeah.
Right.
And he kisses the part of the banister that keeps coming undone, and that's
Right.
a great little moment too, because that's a good visual representation of his state of mind. But he learns to celebrate the flaws as
And
well.
if you're like me, you would like the movie also, Christmas Vacation. There's a nod to that
Right.
very Bannister moment.
Yes.
Mhm.
Although you see that
He just chops it off.
Griswold's his what am I trying to say? His solution is a little less positive than George's.
I would
Oh, I
personally,
love that part.
I would personally love for Clark Griswold to go on a vacation to the Amazon with the crew of Cannibal Holocaust and never come back, if you know what I'm saying.
I love Clark.
And
Dear
end up
God, he's
end
not
up
that
with
bad a character.
end up with the spike through his ass
He
and
is, he is,
everything.
he is, one, he is one of the best characters.
But no, but I get what
Now,
you're saying though. Go ahead.
if I remember correctly, and this was again something that I'm not sure I caught when I was younger, but and y'all can correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, because there were a lot of people in that crowd. But if I'm remembering correctly, Tom, the guy who had insisted on taking every penny out of the building and loan, was one of the first in line to give
I
him
think he was.
something. And I just thought that was kind of a fun little turnaround that he had. I guess I wouldn't say seen the error in his ways, but that even he was willing to pitch in when someone deserved it. You know what I mean?
Some of the crowd dialogue calls back to that scene actually, and I think
Right.
for that exact reason, because they were willing to shell out their money when those people needed it, and then here they are returning the favor.
Yeah, that's one of the best scenes in the movie, where he like calms the crowd down and hooks them up with their cash to make it till the bank can reopen and everything.
I think
And he
that's part
kisses
of
the lady that asked for $17 and
Yeah.
whatever cents, and he just kisses her.
I think this
Right.
movie sparked the pay it forward moment. You know,
Well, it's definitely. I mean, the whole idea of paying it forward is really just a restatement of karma itself. Just the idea that you sow positive seeds with the people that you interact with, and then it does come back around at some point. Maybe not when you expect it, but and bad karma too can do that. And that's the one thing that we don't get to see with Mr. Potter. But again, I'm sure that it's coming for him. And but yeah, I
he
mean,
definitely
go ahead.
He definitely earned his share of bad karma in this one.
Totally.
And one thing that I think we mentioned, but I don't think we really sat on it for a moment and looked at it. But the scene where Billy accidentally hands the money to Potter and doesn't realize it.
Uncle Billy,
my
God.
The scene where first of all, Billy's actions, it's kind of heartbreaking to watch what he's doing. But when Potter opens it, sees the money, looks out, sees Billy freaking out, puts two and two together, and then just quietly closes the door and goes back into his office. I'm like, that is one of the blackest villain moments of any movie I think I've ever seen. Like, that was him being full on villain.
Totally. Well, here's something else to throw in there that I didn't really think about until this time. So Uncle Billy, what a frustrating character in that he's not like a bad person, but man, does he make some screw ups. And what the part that, and I knew that obviously the whole time I've watched this movie for 30 years, but the part that didn't really connect until now. So he seems like he's got a few screws loose, because he not only is he just forgetful with like the string on his fingers and everything.
He's a full-on drunk.
Well,
but he don't drink.
Not only that, but he in the alternate reality, as soon as he loses the building alone, he goes insane. Goes to an insane asylum, and it's like, and even in the version, the real world, quote unquote, even in that reality, he is a bit of a Dr. Doolittle kind of weirdo with all the animals.
Dude had a desk squirrel,
Yeah. Do you have a
I'm not exaggerating. That startled me when it came on the screen, because I don't think we'd seen it up till that moment. And
I do like how Fozzie plays in the Muppet version.
He had the crow all over the office and everything,
Because
talk about being squirrely.
A little bit, But,
have
think
you
about
seen
that.
The Muppet version of this particular?
Oh, yeah,
hopefully he doesn't eat some crow.
A very merry Muppet. I haven't seen that yet, but I've heard.
I do think that Fozzie was a perfect representation of that character.
He would. He definitely would be. His
great.
character matches up. But yeah, I mean, we've really kind of covered off everything major. Maybe some favorite moments. We've covered off all the pretty major scenes there, but anything that particularly stands out to anyone?
Yeah, it's a hard one for me to choose, man. I mean,
Me
there's
too.
so many that I love. I
Such
think
a
I would.
well-rounded movie.
Yeah,
I think if I had to choose, probably that dinner table scene with his dad, as far as the smaller ones go. Just something about that really touched me.
I'm gonna have to choose Dustin's route of the whole movie this time. I can't really pick a scene.
Well, Dustin, rebuttal to that?
Oh no, I'm just laughing at my move being used apparently. So I mean, as for me, it was kind of hard. It's kind of hard to pick a favorite as somebody who grinds tinfoil against their microphone. But man, what was my favorite thing? I think I like his kind of big "I want to be alive" moment.
Yes.
Merry Christmas, movie house.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
that's
that
the one line
whole-
I remember.
Well, that whole breakdown, actually, now that you mention it, that whole breakdown, such a crowning achievement of Jimmy Stewart's acting there, because he really is at the end of his rope, and he really makes you believe that he doesn't. Yeah, he said, "I don't care what happens to me. Get me back to my wife and kids." Like, that is all that matters to him at that moment, and he really makes you believe that completely. Brandon was trying to say something before, but go ahead.
No, I was asking if we had covered the music.
I'd mentioned the music in the alternate reality scenes, but not throughout. It's an element that hasn't. Dmitri Tiomkin is the composer there. Not really one that is talked about as much, but it definitely is effective when it needs to be. It's just not as front and center for most of the movie during kind of those 2/3 of setup.
There is one. There is one way in which music is a very big
them singing.
Element. Yeah, the
Buffalo Gal wants to come out tonight. Yeah,
that was definitely definitely a good scene, and they were singing, but it wasn't really. Yeah, it was.
They even
I
play
like when
the
she
credits at
smashes
the
the
end.
record when she's pissed
Oh
at
yeah,
him.
when she's so upset.
I
Yeah.
love that
Yeah.
scene, and I even love the "I love you truly" when they're singing outside of
Right.
the window.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah.
when Bert and Ernie are singing, yeah.
So it's partially a musical too, on top of all the
And then
other
of
things.
course at the end you've got the famous Auld Lang Syne ending
Yep.
to
Yeah.
the movie.
Yep.
So there are some important musical cues, but I will admit the score. I still could not tell you what the
It's
score sounds like.
it's definitely de-emphasized relative to
Yeah.
Yeah.
everything else.
If you told me there wasn't a score, I'd say okay. Like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, again, the most effective score moments are in that last third. When it needs to be dramatic, it is.
All right.
Tammy, did you have a favorite scene or moment? If she's with us.
Oh, there you go.
I liked most of it, and like everybody else. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
One thing that I thought was you guys talked about earlier about the snow,
Mhm.
and I thought the snow, whatever you said, this was something new that they used for this movie. I had made a comment to Dave last night when we were watching it that it really did look so real. It really did, compared to when you see snow in other older movies. It really looked real. I thought he was getting wet from it and everything and sliding in it. So, I guess
Yeah,
one of
for
my
sure.
favorite scenes though would be Clarence, when Clarence first, when they're after he rescues him, and they're all sitting in the little um that little room with that guy,
Yeah.
and every time as they're bantering back and forth, and the look on that guy's face, it cracks you up because this guy,
I
you
know.
know
He's
that was
great.
so good because the guy's reaction and everything, he's just listening. I think that was one of my favorite scenes.
It's a great one. It helps to kind of make what could be an otherwise kind of dry exposition scene just all that more effective because you just got an ordinary guy who's hearing all this and he's like, "You guys are nuts." Kroll, favorite scene?
Yeah, it's definitely one. I like to say all of them, but I've been thinking about it. And the whole dramatic scene where he goes in the house and no one's there, looks like no one's lived there, and then he goes and finds Mary, and she just like he's like looked completely crazed, and she's freaking out, and that whole scene, it was just such a great scene of someone losing their mind. It's like you really believe that Jimmy Stewart lost his mind at this point, and I think it's just such a powerful scene and such well done that it deserves to be the best scene in the movie.
Yeah. Mo, favorite scene?
Oh, like I said, if I had to pick, smaller moments, definitely just the
Oh,
bits
actually,
with his
yeah,
parents.
you said the parents thing. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Brittany.
Gosh. My favorite scene, I'm gonna have to go with the final scenes,
Mhm.
where they're all coming in, getting the present or getting the money down on there, and George is just looking over at the book, and you see the book. That scene always makes me tear up.
Absolutely. Jake?
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I'm going to mention that I agree the final scene's one of the better ones, but there's a lot here, and it's hard to pick
I
favorites.
know. It's so
If
hard.
we're
It's quite
if we're
long,
talking,
too, so there's
yeah,
a lot going
if we're
on.
talking favorites, I'd probably agree with Tammy. The scene with the toll master or whatever it is. Just again, yeah, his reaction shots were priceless, but the banter between the two of them, George and Clarence, was great too. But I will also mention, because no one has specifically mentioned it, just after that, and the scene at Nick's, because it was Martini's,
Yeah.
now it's Nick's. I love, one of my favorite little moments is when he's like, he comes over all bluster and like, well, what are you having? And, George makes his order. And then Clarence is sitting there just thinking about it. And he tries to describe something. And he's like, actually, how about a nice mulled mead? And he just says it with such confidence and whatever. And then Nick, you see him the whole time just bubbling, the rage just rising.
Yeah.
And then finally he's like, look, we serve hard liquor here for people
want to get drunk fast. Or do I have to slip you my lip for a convincing?
Exactly. And so of all the scenes in the alternate world part, I think that was one of the ones that amused me the most. But if we're not talking amusement and we're just talking great scenes, again, some of the scenes with Potter, and probably particularly the one where he does not tell Billy what happened to the money, and the scene where him and George are in conversation where he nearly tempts George. I think those are probably two of the that I would have to point out.
Those
as
are
well.
definitely great scenes too.
Yeah.
And there's so many great scenes that it is really hard to say your favorite. It really is. I mean, they're just really lots of scenes deserve the merit.
It really is.
Every scene matters in this. You know, that there's nothing extraneous really, and everything.
There's nothing really. There's not much really you could cut out, and I mean, yeah, I guess you could still tell the same story, but every scene they do have makes some kind of impact towards the story. So
totally.
One scene that stands out to me and amuses me the most is when Violet does say, "Hey boys, I think I got a date."
Oh yeah,
that whole thing.
She goes over there and he's like, "I know what we can do. We can go take our shoes off and go into the mountains."
Yes.
And then she was like, "What kind of girl do you think I am?"
Yeah.
And the boys are
like
how those people show up just to laugh at him.
It must be 20 miles up to Mount Bedford.
Well, yeah, that was a good part.
I was thinking the whole time that Mary would love that. Like Mary, that would be like a perfect day for Mary.
Totally, I think she'd be down for it. I mean,
yeah,
maybe they did that. Maybe that's where that first round of kids was made. If you know what I'm saying.
Conceived maybe right over that
possibly.
Brandon, favorite scene for this movie that you love so very, very much?
Well, I mean, I had two that stick out for me. One was where you have the scene as a child where he's working for the druggist, and just that confrontation at the end, a very emotional scene. And then, of course, the swimming pool scene. I don't know why, but whenever I watch the movie, that one always comes to mind first.
Yeah, it's very amusing. That's probably
funny.
Yeah, that's arguably the funniest scene. It's certainly the most memorable of the funny scenes, just because it's a good set piece, literally set piece.
And the fact that they're still dancing in the water. I mean,
I know.
They fell in and they're still dancing. Like they didn't miss a beat.
Yeah. It didn't end the evening, and it just kind of put it in a new direction.
They were kind of having fun, but they was just still dancing. It's like if this was a competition, hands down they won.
And I particularly like the part where the two guys that open the pool, they just kind of look at each other and jump right in.
Yeah, that was.
I think again, I'm kind of with everyone else that there's no bad scene in the movie. I mean, really, if you could get away with saying the whole movie, then I would say that, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to say this. So favorite funny scene would be the bushes where he's going to give the robe back and everything. I just think that's a well-written exchange.
Yeah,
again,
hilarious.
A little bit racy for the time, but it's still very amusing. So that's my favorite funny moment. My favorite romantic moment is probably when we threw rocks at that house. This is what I wished for. I'm like, oh, that just melts my heart when I see that now. Favorite kind of moving moment would be the get me back to my wife and kids. That's like the crux of the movie right there.
Yeah,
there's no two ways about it. But then my favorite, the one that stands out to me just for whatever reason, and because it's not really a famous moment, is that shot where he just looks dead in the camera and he's got that absolutely terrified face on.
Yep.
And then it's followed by probably my favorite line, which again, not a super famous line, but it's the strange, isn't it, how one man's life affects so many other lives. And that is, again, that's the message of the movie. Every single person's life matters. And
Yep.
no matter how difficult we have it, life itself really is a wonderful thing, and we need to make the most of it every day. So, yeah, that was It's a Wonderful Life. So,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
one last thing before we do our outros is the fact that this. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, just to throw a thought, since I know she's listening in, why don't we have Kim give her favorite parts?
Why not? If she's still with us. If not,
Say what?
your favorite moment, favorite scene.
Probably when he was desperately trying to convince the bartender.
Oh yeah,
And then of course when he sees the chemist and he realizes that,
yes.
oh wow,
Galore.
well my life did have meaning and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Mhm.
Well, super fast thing before the outro there is that so this movie came out, did not do well at the box office at all, got some mixed reviews. It did get several Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound Recording. Did not win any of them.
Kind of like The Wizard of Oz.
And it did not, much like The Wizard of Oz, it didn't get its true rise to popularity until it got on television, except that, unlike The Wizard of Oz, it got on television because for a brief period of time, it did slip into public domain, but it kind of found its way out of it because it was deemed to be a derivative work of the original short story that was still in copyright. So it kind of weaseled its way out of public domain, and through a variety of different, ownership disputes and stuff, it still is in the Paramount Pictures catalog, even though it was not a Paramount Pictures film. So that's why, like, whenever you look at lists of public domain films, this film is in there, kind of, sorta. I think that still images of it are able to be used freely, but the whole movie and some of the other like score elements and that kind of stuff, basically, anything else that they can possibly copyright, they're trying to hold on to as much as possible to try to shore up, whatever they can. Eventually, all the elements will fall into public domain, though. But regardless, that's part of what gave it its rise to popularity, and then through many years of being shown on television, it became the classic that we all know it today, and it influenced so many other movies from that point on, like Gremlins, like actually the Adam Sandler movie Click rips this movie off pretty extensively, and just countless others. Basically everything that Spielberg ever did pretty much can be taken from this. Frank Darabont lifts a lot of stuff from this, so...
In truth, Sandler liked to lift a lot from Capra, so
yeah, it is true.
Yeah.
He did.
Well, he did remake Deeds. I mean,
Yeah.
Mr. Deeds. Yeah.
It surprised me how close those two movies really were.
Yeah, and I mean, Frank Capra was definitely a populist filmmaker of his time, as Adam Sandler was a populist actor and star, of his particular time. It's just the definitions of that have changed over time, and the audience sensibilities and everything, but it's unmistakable that that's the case. So, good parallel there to draw. Well, let's do our outro, shall we? Why don't you go first, Kroll?
Hi, I'm Kroll. I don't work right now. I'm disabled, but I do love movies and TV shows. I read books and play games, and I'm on this podcast, and I'm on another podcast on Sundays, Delusion of Grandeur, with Tammy and Dave, and another guy, and Mo too when he comes on, and we have fun talking about movies on that show too.
Awesome, Tammy. Speaking of whom, why don't you tell us what you're all about? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tammy. I'm Dave's fiance, and he got me into coming on this one. And like Kroll mentioned, the other podcast, I enjoy movies, books, music, and doing my own collections. And I've so far enjoyed learning more about movies by coming on these with everybody.
Nice. Kroll mentioned Mo, so Mo, go ahead. Tell us what you're all about.
Well, I have my personal YouTube channel, Retro Cult Home Video, where I do a ton of full moon content. I got a wave of about 10 reviews coming out for that here soon, as well as some indie horror reviews submitted, or four films submitted by a couple of our fine folks here, Dave and Brandon. And aside from that, just pretty much going to be working on that full moon stuff like usual. I did, however, do a pretty decent discussion with Dane here for the Cinema Slut podcast on Phantom of the Opera, the 1925 version. So be sure to give that a listen if you have interest in that film.
Yeah, that was an awesome discussion. Brittany, tell us a little bit more about yourself, if you will.
All right, I am Brittany Dotson, aka Embria Arts. I'm known pretty much for comics, artwork, and whatnot, but I'm also do video game playthroughs and also some read-throughs. In fact, Thursday I will be doing Christmas Carol read-through live on my website.
Wonderful. And Brandon, justify your existence in 15 seconds or less.
SeptumSin, SeptumSin versus the world. We do physical media stuff. Mainly pick up videos these days, though occasional other things. We have a lot of cool stuff coming on the horizon for the next year. Today I put up a brief review of the Bad Ben Christmas special, which is a lovely little Christmas episode. And I'm hoping to get some real Bad Ben discussion coming on next year, which will be pretty fun. Of course, tomorrow we're doing our weekly exchange. Our yearly exchange video. So it's going pretty awesome.
Yeah, it will be.
In any case, that's it for that one. I'll see y'all again for the next week episode movie.
Yeah, and then Jake.
Oh, and Kim, you actually have you have a channel too, don't you?
Yeah, well, I have a channel. All right, I'm Kim. I'm SeptumSin's wife. I've got my own YouTube channel called Kim Creates That Stuff. Basically, I do a lot of creative journaling. Occasionally, I talk about movies and books. My videos I've got coming up is doing my new bullet journal theme for 2022, namely my January theme, which is going to be a take on George Méliès's Trip to the Moon and / Smashing Pumpkins, Melancholy and Infinite Sadness. So I'm going to be filming that this week and uploading it next week, hopefully.
Cool.
Jake?
Oh, my favorite pumpkin song. Anyway, my name is Jake. I am the co-host on SeptumSin versus the world. And as Brandon said, we have a fun video for you this week. Unfortunately, Mo just jumped. He'd be thrilled to know what some of the pickups were. And I am a movie and anime and just general media fan and collector here in Central Virginia, where in addition to just work most of the time, been working hard on trying to build a native plant nursery, but also trying to find time for more creative projects. I have thrown some money toward a few short films on Kickstarter, and I'll be looking forward in the new year to seeing what comes of that. And just like to come on here and chat with you fine folks about it's always fun to get a diverse assortment of viewpoints, and to come on for a movie like this and find two people in the chat that were relatively new to it is, kind of one of those nice surprises.
It was a nice surprise, although had to talk Brandon down from the ledge there because he was going on such a rage-filled rant about how much he hated it, and I had to calm him down, but we got through it.
Brandon, this wasn't American Beauty.
I
Yeah,
know.
you could clearly hear the rage in my voice throughout
I
the
know.
entirety.
Unreal. Absolutely unreal. I've never heard someone so angry. Dustin, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you will.
Well, I collect horror movie stuff here in Milwaukee. I have a channel for showing off the stuff that I find. The Crypt of Horrors on YouTube. I also have an Instagram. Well, the Crypt of Horrors. Surprise. So come follow me on there. And see the stuff that I post. Hopefully we'll have some new videos going live soon on the YouTube channel. You can find me on Twitter at Duracryptaxis. I'm pretty active on there. We just had our Freddy's Nightmares soundtrack on vinyl come today, so we got that posted on Instagram. So there's stuff happening again. So
Very nice.
come give me a follow.
Very nice. Well, I'm Dane Kyle. Thank you for letting me host this episode, and I have my channel Dangerous Arts, which I changed my avatar to more directly advertise it, but it's DANEJUROUS Arts. Did a series back in October called Oztober, and this was 31 days of Wizard of Oz adaptations, and I'm currently working on April in Wonderland, which will be a bigger, better production, in addition to 30 days of Alice in Wonderland reviews. So it'll be a fun time. And I've done a lot of filmmaking projects and everything outside of that, but April in Wonderland will allow me to do reviews, but also bring some more of that filmmaking back into the fold. Because I hadn't been able to do that in a while due to COVID and everything. But yes, thank you for letting me host. And Dave, please wrap us up.
Definitely. My name is David Streggy. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming along with us on this fantastic holiday journey where we have been, some of us, discovering films for the first time or revisiting classic entertaining stories and gathering around the Christmas holiday to discuss these wonderful films. But I also moonlight under a different channel, which is called Delusions of Grandeur, where we also podcast under that particular title. I also do video pickups and video reviews of my own from time to time. And there is a new pickup video where I go on and give Crypt of Horrors a great shout out for something that I have in my collection. So definitely check that out when you get a chance. It went live a little bit before we went on here. So it is the 85th episode of mine of showing you what's in my room, and I just enjoy sharing my collection as it comes. So, but Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's in store for us next week?
Well, the holidays are not quite over for us, as we wrap up next week with another Christmas classic called White Christmas, with a few little known people. Bing Crosby, somebody you probably never heard of, or Danny Kaye, another.
Rosemary Clooney.
Love Danny Kaye.
A couple of no-name actors and singers, but it's still something I'm sure that people would love for the holidays.
The first Christmas film I ever saw.
Cool.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a wonderful life. So make sure you realize that you, every one of you, is important.
Every
So-
single person's life matters.
Mm-hmm.
Have a good
Well,
evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good night, all,
Night,
night.
night.
and Merry
Night.
Christmas.